This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are thrilled to be with you. I am joined, as always, by Dr. Mark Mayfield.
What's up?
Who has a book coming out real soon, just to remind you.
Oh, man. I still have a lot to do on that one, but...
Still in edits.
It's still in edits, but it's there. The majority of it's there.
And it's about teens and suicide and self-harm, right?
Yep, and helping parents figure it out.
Yeah.
Because, helping teens figure it out, too, because most of the time when we're doing these things, we don't know why we're doing them.
Totally.
To that extent, so.
Well, and having a teen who's actively suicidal or self-harming can be really scary, and that's kind of a tie into what we're talking about today.
I like that.
I'm getting better at that.
That was really good.
Today, we're going to continue a series that we started last season, and it was based off of a song that Mr. Rogers used to sing. And it was...
I wish we had like a little board right here where we can push the button and
wouldn't it be so nice? Like I need a sound guy.
Right, play the song or a producer. Well, you're the producer, but like have a producer sit right over there.
Have some disc jockey.
Right.
That'd be awesome. But anyways, this song by Mr. Rogers was called What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel? And basically it was teaching emotional intelligence to kids around anger and saying like, so when you're so mad you could bite, what do you do with that feeling? Right. And how do you know that you can control it? You can be the master over your emotions. And so Dr. Mayfield and I did a brief series, I think it was 3 parts, talking about what do you do with the mad that you feel, the sad that you feel, the anxiety that you feel. And so we're returning with that concept again today by talking about what do you do with the fear that you feel.
And a plug for those of you that are listening that have young kids, this is what Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood does. It's a spin-off of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on his little tiger that used to come out. And it's a cartoon. And so my girls who don't know who Mr. Rogers is but know who Daniel Tiger is, they talk about, when you feel mad, count to 5 and take a deep breath and that kind of stuff. I screwed the song up there, but my girls do it, and so it's a continuation of Mr. Rogers.
That's cool.
So check it out. When you have kids, it'll still probably be around.
Yeah,
but
probably.
It's a really cool continuation of his legacy.
Yeah, that's awesome. So. We're not going to go into too much detail on things that we've already covered in the previous episodes. We don't want it to be just repeat information about a different emotion. Because if you have emotional intelligence, it's not just for one emotion.
Come on, guys. Get to the point here.
So highly encourage you to go back and listen, or I don't think there's a video for that one, but listen to those episodes on what do you do with the mad that you feel, the sad that you feel, and the anxiety that you feel. As we enter into this conversation, Mark, maybe we should start with talking about what fear is, and even at like a chemical level.
Well, it's, and I'm sure you're studying this too in your program, but it's the what's the word I'm looking for? It's the triggering of the flight, fight, or freeze response system, right? So our bodies are designed to protect themselves, right? And that's how we were designed. And so if you think about it, think about the last time that maybe you were crossing the crosswalk or it got close, to a curb and a car came a little too close to you and your kids were there or whatever. What's your initial instinctual response? It's to take a step back, put your hand in front of them, something like that, right? And that's our body's kind of the unconscious part of our body's fight, flight, or freeze response kicking in for protection. And so what that happens is it kind of shuts down the thinking parts of the brain. And this is a really important part that we'll talk about in a little bit, but it shuts down the thinking part, so the frontal cortex, and activates the flight, fight, or freeze response, which is kind of the cortical limbic system, the central part of the brain stem. And if you look at any kind of scan, if you could do a live scan when that happens, really the blood goes from the brain, the cardiac output, which is about like over 60% goes to the brain, actually depletes the brain. Blood from the brain goes to the major organs and then to our muscle groups, right? So we think about it. If it goes to the major organs, what's that doing?
Making your heart race.
Right, and it's protecting your liver and your kidneys and your lungs, for survival. But then the big muscle groups, you think about, when was the last time you were scared or got angry? It goes to your fists, your biceps, your legs to run. And so it gives you a better chance of survival.
Yeah. Another really interesting aspect of the fight, flight, freeze aspect is if you've ever sat on like a cliff edge or a wall or something like that, somewhere high, and you're sitting there and you feel like you're being pushed forward.
Right.
What's actually happening is that your brain is responding to danger by saying, we need to go away from this wall. Get away from this edge.
Right.
But then all of your muscles are saying, I don't need to move. I'm not going to move. And your brain can get a little bit confused because you're feeling a draw back, but also a draw forward. And so your muscles are saying we need to move forward because we're being told to go backwards. And so when you're feeling that, it is your fight, flight, freeze, trying to protect you from danger. And I think there's a really, there's a beautiful way to see the fight, flight, freeze, especially in moments when it's been going on for years, of acknowledging that your body is trying to protect itself.
Right. Isn't that, I think just sitting with that for a second is an amazing concept, that we didn't need to consciously do anything for our body to engage that. Now, again, this is not the episode to talk about PTSD. This is not the episode to talk about some of those prolonged cortisol. So another thing that enhances is adrenaline and cortisol are two hormones that are dumped to keep us alert. So not only is the fight, flight, or freeze response going, but then the stress response and the adrenaline. And that's, again, another episode we can talk about adrenaline junkies, or, those that are, adventure seekers that are probably not creating the safest environments for themselves because they could die, but there's can be something addicting about that as well. Which is why I think sometimes we're drawn to, and I know we want to talk about this a little bit, but horror movies or we're drawn to things that make us jump. Because there is a little bit of an endorphin, dopamine kick of, that scared me. Now I feel good.
Right. Well, and we've talked about this before, that our brains are kind of stupid in that if we're visualizing something.
Yeah, he did say that our brains are stupid. They're a dumb organ.
Maybe, maybe they're foolish would be a better way to put it. But
Dr. Siegel calls them a dumb organ because our mind is what controls the brain. And
fair enough.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, okay, I'll take Dan Siegel on that. But so our brains, if we visualize something happening, our brains will start to think that it's actually happening. And so at the beginning of my master's program, the professors were saying, visualize working through the degree, not the moment of getting your degree, but working through it, because then your brain is actively practicing the grit and the resilience that it's going to need to get through. And when we watch horror movies,
I'll get an example for that one. So
our brains don't know the difference. And so we are actually putting ourselves in the situation of the person who is being attacked by the Texas Chainsaw person.
Well, so if this is, good grief, 2004, so many years ago, 15 years ago. So shout out to Rusty and Jesse if you're listening. Probably not listening, but if they are. We were working at a camp in the middle of the mountains, and The Ring came out. So 15 years ago, The Ring came out, and we thought, it'd be great to go down. We have Friday afternoon off, so we went down to the mountain, or from the mountains to Denver, and watched the movie. Well, it got over at dark.
Yeah.
And if you're living in the middle of the mountains in a cabin, our brain started seeing things that weren't there.
Right.
But because we saw something scary, and it kind of elicited that response, our brain starts to fill in the gaps, right? Yep. And especially with darkness, our brain, our sight and our the occipital lobe and that kind of stuff, when it's dark, it's going to fill in things to help us navigate through darkness.
Because our brains don't work very well when they don't have enough information.
Right.
They kind of go into panic mode.
Right. And so think about going to see a scary movie, now going back up to the mountains, seeing The Ring. If anybody's seen The Ring, you know what I'm talking about. And you go up to the mountains and you start seeing shadows move or things like that. But it's our brain trying to fill in the information based on what we just saw. And so we all, went to sleep or tried to go to sleep with, I had a Bowie knife about this big. I had it under my pillow that night. And
You had a reflective surface
yeah.
after watching The Ring.
Right, exactly. Probably not the best idea, right?
No. But that's just your brain not thinking through things logically, which happens when you're going through fear is we go into panic mode is just a really good way to put it.
Right.
We don't think through things logically. And so for anyone who's seen a kid who is really scared of a nightmare they just had, there's no real good way to logic them out of that panic.
No, you hold them and you sit with them and you let them cry and process. And
there needs to be some sort of soothing that happens.
Well, it's interesting. So we're talking about horror movies. We're talking about kind of adrenaline, that kind of stuff. But fear for a lot of us, and a lot of the listeners probably is, starts out as worry. Worry about the future, worry about what's coming around the corner that we don't see, worry that our kids are going to be safe, worry, right? And then that leads into fear.
Yeah. Which there's a gentleman, Steve Earle, that I worked with recently, and he came to do a training at Mayfield.
He'll be at our conference too. This hopefully this fall. So,
and he was talking about studies have been done on worry that show that a solid 86% of what people worry about never happens.
How much?
86%. And then he said 6%. That there's an additional 10 to 15%, or not 15, 10 to 12% or so that kind of matches. So it's like I had a fear that I would lose money and I dropped a $5 bill. And it's like, okay, I guess I can give it to you. It kind of fits. And then the study found out, their conclusion was about 4% of what we worry about ever happens. Only 4%.
That's crazy.
And he was talking about how much of a waste of time worry is and how worry doesn't actually help anything. And I think that's the lie with worry. And in a more malicious way, the lie that we receive with fear.
Well, I think the maliciousness of fear, I think it's a great word to describe it, is that we think we have some semblance of control if we give into the fear. Mm-hmm. If I'm fearful, it means I'm more hypervigilant, which means I'm going to pay attention to and it's all a lie.
Yeah.
Because we just said that when fear kicks in, stress kicks in, you're not more hypervigilant because your brain's not working the way it should be, know, and so it's, I think it's a great analogy.
Well, I am a big fan of adventure movies, bad sci-fi movies, action movies, and a common theme that comes up when you have this training montage or something, or even Space Troopers, I think has this.
It's a bad one.
A really bad one, but I love it so much. Is this concept of when you're in a combat situation or a really stressful situation, you have to control your fear. And I just recently watched a Netflix movie called Polar, which I wouldn't recommend. Don't go watch it. But there is a moment in that movie where there's an assassin who's the main character who's being targeted by a bunch of other assassins. He's obviously better because he's the star of the show. And he's hunting down this one person, and the person is really scared of him because he's shown himself to be crazy good at what he does. And he keeps saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You make mistakes when you're afraid.
Right.
And she finally gives in to the fear that she feels, and that's the mistake that allows him to overcome.
Right.
And we see that in real life of fear is something that can be helpful when controlled, but oftentimes we just give in to it. And we've talked about we don't want to be giving into emotions as much as we are kind of having ownership of that.
I think that's a great distinction because I think we talked earlier, just some examples about fear protecting us in situations where our conscious mind isn't caught up quite yet to, that car's coming really fast.
Right.
So that's all good stuff. And that's, I think, how it's been designed, right? Self-preservation. But in our modern world, in the industrial world where we're not out, doing things right that it's very much we can sit with our thoughts a lot and give into the fears.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good distinction of, okay, it's okay to be afraid if it warrants it, right?
So like stepping into a road and seeing a truck and backing
Right.
up real quick.
Or being at home and hearing somebody in the back door jiggle on the handle.
Yeah.
Or your kid hasn't checked in and they just got their license and it's 10:30 and you don't know where they're at. Right. Those are all, I think, normal responses. I think those are
Appropriate,
healthy responses. But to not give your kid their driver's license because you're afraid of what could happen because of something that happened to you when you were their age 30 years ago, like,
or even stepping away from the curb as the bus passes and then being so afraid that you aren't willing to walk
across the street
again.
Right. And so I think for those of us, and I say us because I've been guilty. I mean, fear is something that I struggle with. You know, it kind of goes pairs. Shouldn't say pairs nicely, but it pairs nicely with anxiety, right? And and I've shared, just a little bit on this show that anxiety and fear are kind of my two things and worry. Those kind of three things are really what I struggle with. And I think the biggest piece of it is not giving in, not being overcome or giving into those thoughts. Yeah. And I as we do counseling, I'm not a very big cognitive behavioral person, but I also believe that there's something powerful around our thoughts.
Totally.
And I think the way not to offend anybody, but the way cognitive behavioral goes about it, I think is a little bit backwards. But to recognize our thoughts, to hold our thoughts captive and go, okay, what is that thought? Okay, that thought is this, and this. And then kind of rationalize through and here's and not a shameless plug for counseling, but to do it with somebody, I think is a big deal, because a lot of times we don't know. If we've been dealing with fear for a long time, we might not know what is rational, what is not. Yeah. And to have somebody else speak into that, whether it be a friend, a spouse, a partner, a counselor, a pastor, whatever. You know.
Well, and it's also so diffusing to sit with another person and say, I'm afraid of X. And all of a sudden, X becomes far less scary.
Sure.
One, because you're in a safe place where X can't get to you. And the other part is, a lot of the times with most of what we feel, we don't talk about it. And so when we do speak it out loud, give voice to it, we hear ourselves say it, which is a unique experience. And then it loses a lot of its power. It just falls flat on its face. And so when I say, I'm really afraid that my candle in the room is going to explode on me like dynamite, that kind of sounds silly now that I say it out loud.
Well, and my favorite question, I'm not sure if you've done this yet in your sessions with your clients, is so what's the worst that can happen? Let's talk it out to the worst. And I'd have clients go, well, I'd lose my house. Okay. What's the worst that can happen? And then what? Well, I'd have to go live with my parents. Okay. Would you be okay? Oh yeah. I guess I'd figure it out. I'd be disappointed. I'd be sad. But I'd be okay. And then you're like, oh. Right? And if 86% of what we worry about doesn't happen.
Right. There you have very slim chances of whatever you're worrying about happening.
And most of my clients, that if they've been with me long enough, I get that kind of grin and like, oh, yes, what's the worst that can happen? And they, but kind of an existential question, but it's true. Like, and to some of the worst things, somebody comes in and says, they found something on a scan and it could be cancer. Okay, what's the worst that can happen? Well, it's cancer. And I have to go through chemo and on radiation, and then I might die. Yeah. And that's a whole different level of fear and anxiety and existential conversation. But even in those conversations, they're like, well, okay, can I deal with that, work through that? Okay, right. And so it kind of diffuses the whole thing.
Right. Well, and to the worry aspect, a simile is, last I heard, and this is not necessarily founded. It may be folklore knowledge, but I've heard that about 4% of high school sweethearts go on to get married and stay married. And compare that to the 100% of high school sweethearts who think they're going to make it.
Right.
I think worry's the same way. And if we look at those high school students who have so much love and infatuation in their eyes and are so enamored with this person and so excited for what the future could hold for them. And we compare that to how we are now and just translate a few things of we're really afraid that this is going to happen and we're so caught up and we want to plan for it and we're concerned about the future. If we compare those, set them side by side and talk about how the chances are essentially the same of the high schoolers going on to be life partners for the rest of their lives and the worry actually coming to fruition, it gives a little bit of perspective of how seriously we should be taking this worry.
Sure.
Because I think, again, most of us who are worriers are going to hear only 4% of what you worry about actually happens and use that to give more validity to
credence.
That means I'm the 4%.
Well, and I also want to say this as we come to a close in a little bit is think about what fear and worry do. And they rob you of the now.
Totally.
Right. And so if you think about, my girls are getting older. I've got an almost 11-year-old and 5-year-old. And I'm like, I want to be present for the now. I don't want to be thinking about what could happen or what might happen down the future because I'm going to lose out on this conversation or this special moment or, or even with my wife. Right. And so if you think about what worry does is if it's 86% doesn't happen and we're so consumed by it that we miss out on currently what's going on in our lives, the good, the bad, the hard. And, we're going to miss out on the journey. And I think that's the biggest conversation I've had with my clients over the years. And even my own life, as I look back on it, going, man, I missed out on some really important things that I can't take back. But if I had somebody that was walking through me or kind of shaking me a little bit going, hey, listen to these stats, listen to this, let's talk through what's the worst that can happen. Let's give some validity to, well, okay, that could happen. And will you be okay if that does? To be present with those small blessings in the moment.
Yeah. And I think, I like looking at fear. Like there's obviously a caring, self-preserving aspect to fear.
Sure.
But as soon as we start seeing fear from the perspective of maliciousness and a thief, I think it puts it in a better perspective for us because fear is not an emotion that is healthy for us in a long period of time, the same way choosing to be joyful or choosing to be pensive or any of these emotions that we can sit with and explore and become old friends with. Fear is kind of, it's like a weather alert system. It's important for a lot of reasons, but I don't want that playing in my car over and over.
Well, no, and I think if we want to talk about kind of a continuum, worry gives into fear. Fear gives into anxiety.
Hatred gives into fear. Fear leads to the dark side. Sorry.
Wow. Yeah. Calling out your nerdiness here. But you think about it and it's, okay, is worry, but you think about this, the continuum.
Yeah.
And if we end up with anxiety, it shows that the power of our thoughts can lead to this mental, diagnosable mental disorder or struggle called anxiety, where really it's a result of maladaptive thoughts over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can go back and go, okay, I'm worried, let me just sit with that for a while and walk through it. And then, okay, maybe I didn't get to the worry in time, but now I'm kind of fearful. And for a lot of us, okay, I let fear take over and now I'm anxious. We can still track back and work through all those to find that peace, even in the midst of those things.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, plugging the beauty of counseling and the beauty of having a safe friend. It doesn't have to be a counselor, but a lot of times there's tons of people in this community, in this world, that don't have a safe friend, and so they pay for one, and that's okay. Right. And I love the phrase that we're not paying our therapist to make us better. We're paying our therapist to help us become better.
Right. And for a safe place. I think the more I learn about counseling, the more I'm struck by how the room itself becomes this safe environment where I can throw out all of those thoughts and the feelings and not be afraid that I'm going to be judged or condemned for it. And I can just leave everything that I've spoken in that room and walk away from it.
Absolutely.
And I can also walk away from everything in my life to spend an hour in this place where it doesn't exist.
Yep.
Or doesn't have to exist without my permission to bring it in.
Right. Well, if you need counseling or you need somebody to help you find a good counselor in your area, feel free to reach out at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or give us a call at 719-452-4803 and talk with our wonderful inquiry coordinator whose job title is probably going to change here shortly, Adam Smith, and we'd love to walk with you in your journey.
Fear not. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.